Welcome to United Inc. This is our football finance show. No question about that. I'm with Jamie as always. How's it going, Jamie?
Yeah, very good. Battling through the late nights / early mornings for the World Cup. Although I will admit, I think the 2 o'clock starts are just out of reach for me, as was the 5 o'clock start for I think Austria Jordan last night. But I did manage to wake up
Good
and
game.
catch. Yeah, I managed to catch. I think the winning goal, and then the penalty, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yeah, right at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been good fun. I've really enjoyed it so far. Like with most of these tournaments, as soon as the football kicks off, you tend to focus on that, and it's been nice to see. I think some of the smaller nations get results. It won't be that consequential for the big teams, of course, but yeah, I think it keeps interest in these group stages.
For sure. I think there's been some cracking games. Obviously, the timing is great for me, so I'm enjoying that thoroughly. I think for the most part, there's been a decent atmosphere in the grounds. I mean, people have obviously been fleeced because prices have held up. I thought they'd crash a bit more. So we've had empty stadiums, but with prices holding up, which is a bit weird. Not empty stadiums, but there's not been too many. Very few of them have completely sold out. There's almost every game you can get tickets on the secondary markets, whether it's FIFA's own or their side deals. Talk the finance show, so we can talk about this. But FIFA have been selling off on the slide, presumably at a fairly significant discount, tickets to Vivid, which is Todd Bowley's, and SeatGeek. Not awesome. Like they're just, I know they were touting anyway because they were taking 30% on secondary sale markets anyway. But yeah, it is odd how I'm surprised at how much their prices have held up. I thought they would have come down more like they did for the Club World Cup, but I think FIFA have taken the view that they'd much rather have empty seats than falling revenues. There you go. But the football's been good. Austria Jordan, as you mentioned last night, was very entertaining because both teams wanted it to be. Basically, Jordan, very old fashioned, just played long balls all night. It's great. It's very entertaining. All right. So today we're going to talk about United's debt. It's been at least part of United's debt has been refinanced or placed privately. So partly private placement, partly with Bank of America. It's kind of split into three tranches. That's one of their bonds. There's a second one that comes up for maturity next year that will probably be looking at something similar. Whether we'll get any movement on the ownership by then, we'll see. We'll also talk about United's deal with Amazon. I don't think we've actually had solid numbers out of anyone, but I think we can presume that is fairly lucrative. We don't have a shirt sleeve sponsor to talk about yet. That is going to happen at some point, though, I expect. And what else do we talk about, Jamie? There's something else on the agenda.
Oh, whether some of the Glazers may sell a few more
Yes.
shares.
Ownership, yes. Okay, so we are going to talk about ownership. Yeah, there you go. All right, let's talk about the debt first, because this is going to get nerdy, because in simple terms, they've taken $425 million worth of bonds, and they've converted it to $550 million worth of bonds and debt. Not publicly. The initial bond was a public offering. Sort of. Yes, it was. Yes, because it was the second refinancing of that one. This one has not been a public offering, but explain what it's made up of, because this is a bit complicated.
Yeah, so it was a private placement, which means it's a bond that's issued to more, I think the terminology is sophisticated investors. So, your
doesn't
pension...
take much to be a sophisticated investor, by the way, in the US. And
No.
actually, it takes almost nothing in the UK. So it's as an aside. So I think it's $1 million worth of assets and or $250,000 worth of income a year to be a sophisticated investor here in the States. In the UK, I think it's just the income and not very much either, if I remember correctly. And to be a venture capitalist, as I was for a while, absolutely no qualifications whatsoever. It's amazing. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think the realistic buyers of this debt have been more institutions. So your pension funds, your
asset
banks,
managers,
and asset managers, those sorts of folks. And as you said, the new kind of loan that's been taken out is $550 million, which is obviously bigger than the 425 that was existing.
That's the analysis we like here, folks.
Yeah.
550 is bigger than 425. Yeah.
We're just breaking it down in simple chunks. And then the interest rate has also gone up, which is not entirely unexpected.
No.
I think, there was a debate as to, or I say debate, I think there was some fans that were definitely angry about the fact that the headline debt figure has gone up, and why is this happening, and why isn't the debt being paid down, etc., etc. We can get on to that point as to whether the debt will actually increase later on, but just to kind of go through the terms. So the new interest rate on this loan is 5.36%. It was previously 3.79%. And most of the other terms and covenants that come with the debt have not changed at all. So interest rate, debt up, interest rate up is the headline figure which many have run with. I think just to look at the interest rate, an increase of 1.57%, I actually think is incredibly good.
It feels like a really good deal. I know, like for fans, they're like, actually, we're paying more, mate. So
yeah,
but in the current environment, given that United took this bond out when it was basically free money, that's a pretty good deal, and probably talks to the strength of the finances right now.
Exactly. And I think, we talked at the last set of results about how you're starting to see the impact of, a lot of the changes that were made when Ineos first came in. I think this is another one of those, another effect of that, in the fact that we can now go to debt markets and raise funds. I also think that, the fact that we are looking to build a new stadium may have also actually helped with this, right? Because it's it's one of those deals where it's like, okay, we know that there's going to be this other big placement of debt that's probably coming down the track. Can you find some way to negotiate a good deal on this one?
Yeah.
And, at the end of the day, you're probably all going to make this back up anyway, because
exactly, yeah. Borson had a few snarky tweets on this, which basically I just thought, like, guys, the thing that annoys me about Borson is he knows better, right? And he likes to troll, but he knows a lot better, right? So he basically said that United placing $2 billion, pounds, whatever, pick your denomination, on the P&L is, quote, for the birds. Yeah, absolutely. United are not going to be placing £2 billion on the P&L. As we've talked about before, it's going to be much more structured, and probably with some of the institutions that have worked on this as well, not all, and it's going to be structured in a fairly complex manner, as has been, and partly revenue-based, and partly long-term debt, and partly equity, as has been the case with every other stadium project like we've seen around the world recently. Save for Spurs, who basically just issued a bond at 0% interest, which was an unbelievably good deal for them. Yeah. So who are the institutions that are likely to be taking up this debt, and what's the impact on United's finances then? So, and we talked a little bit about the institutions, that they're all fairly boring. Bank of America took about $200 million worth of this. We already have a line of credit with them, so I guess we're in good standing with Bank of America at the moment. Probably a few pension funds and alternative asset managers and hedge funds and that kind of thing as well. What's the impact on the bottom line? How much more is it going to cost us? Oh, and the other thing we didn't talk about is what's the term of this?
So the term of this, the term of this debt is till 2031. So effectively an extension of four years, 4 and a bit years. I think the other thing to note, and we touched on it, and not many people have picked this up, but I did put it in my Substack. If you actually read through the whole release, all debt that United has actually been extended to 2031 with this placement, and it's basically all got the same terms. So actually, it's not just refinancing of this debt. You've actually also pushed out future potential debt cliffs where we would have to go to market and do this again, which from an operational standpoint is a major time saver and allows them to really, I think, focus on the bigger projects out there, like the stadium. So I think that's another really big win. And then to the second point in terms of what's the increase in cost. Well, I'm going to break this down into two parts. The headline increase in cost is around about 10 million incremental interest cost.
Yep.
That will not, pardon the pun, break the bank from a cash flow perspective, nor will it really impact things too drastically on UEFA's football earnings rule. But I think the important or the interesting thing about this is, as far as debt refinancings are ever interesting, is the extra debt that we have taken out, that $125 million, right? That's extra cash that we now have sitting in our bank accounts. And the club's basically got three options on what they do with it. They can do nothing, just use it as a buffer in the bank account. They can choose to invest it and use that to kind of effectively expand the transfer budget or the wage budget and put that cash to work immediately. Or, invest in other areas of the club like the women's team. Or, and the final one, which is the bit that I think is most likely, is use it as a lower financing tool, right? So what I mean with that is if you think about, United's debt buckets in two, the financial debt, you got one hand, which is the Glazer LBO debt, and then you got the other hand, which is the credit facility.
Yep.
We've been using that credit facility to effectively run the day-to-day operations.
Yeah,
and
it's cash flow, basically.
Exactly. And so now that facility is on a much higher interest rate than the Glazer
new
debt.
bond, yeah.
The new bond. And so what I would expect us to do is move that $125 million into the credit facility to just lower our average drawdown through the year. And so, look, if the highest that could save us is actually £10 million, and so that would negate the actual headline interest cost. I don't think the reality is that won't be the case, because we will still need to use the facility through the year. But I would expect that actually that headline £10 million to be closer to 5 to 7 million, which in the grand scheme of things, again, I think it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah. Of course, absolutely, we'd like that debt to be zero. The reality of this is basically evergreen. And until there's a change in the ownership, there's no change in this debt. And I actually don't think, even if Ratcliffe took over the club fully tomorrow, that he would end up paying down that debt. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense for him to liquidate his assets in order to do that. We'll think about long term later. I mean, in 25 years' time, are we still going to be talking about a United with £750 million or dollars worth of debt? We might be, but there's a lot going to happen between now and then. All right, let's talk a little bit about how that ties into the stadium, because not a lot has happened on the stadium front. It appears to be sort of in stasis. The Times did a piece last week, the week before, in which they interviewed basically all the major parties who are running for both the Makerfield by-election, which is happening. Is that today or tomorrow? It's really soon. Which could determine the future is likely to determine the future Prime Minister if you look at the local polling, and also the Mayor of Manchester, who's been quite tightly integrated into the development plan for the area. It was framed, that article, as United could get bad news and it would delay the stadium. I thought that was nonsense, obviously. Yeah, the question was, this is how it works. Hey, if you win this mayoral election, will you review the plans for the development? I forget what the development plan is called now. The development of the Old Trafford area. Yes, we will. And that's basically the entire article. So yeah, what a fucking surprise! But it could impact the timeline. I think what is actually impacting the timeline is the lack of a Freightliner deal and the probable need for a compulsory purchase order in order to make that happen at market rates and not the inflated rate that Freightliner appear to be asking. Is there anything else happening on the stadium front that we think is relevant here? No clues in the release from the SEC note that went out?
I think, look, the biggest thing for me is actually the extension in the debt timelines, right? That gives us, or gives the club, way more flexibility on how and when they do this, right? And it kind of almost delineates the accounts as they currently are with the stadium project. It allows the two to run, I think, just a little bit more kind of exogenous to each other.
Yeah. But that was always going to be the case, but it does make it nice and clean. Yeah.
Exactly. And then I think, the other thing to bear in mind here is that I think it clears our path a little bit to be self-sustaining financially. We're not on this hamster wheel of having to kind of constantly improve the state of our financials. That should, if the plan works, that should now start to naturally happen. I think the other thing on the stadium is just that there will be ongoing conversations, I think, around the financing of it, the various structures. How do they use personal seat licenses, and in what parts of the stadium does it make the most sense? I continue to think that it shouldn't be for general admission. It should be for hospitality, and I actually think you'd be much more likely to get kind of a decent take up on that, particularly if you're selling it to corporates and local businesses in the area. And whether there'll be, any stadium naming rights, again, that's probably not one of my favorite options, but it will be, I think on the stadium front, it will be a lot more to do with based on our finances and how they're improving, and then the economics of the stadium, what financing can we afford to take out? Mm-hmm. And that will be the key debate, I think, not just this year, but I think over the next few years.
I did a speculative piece on my Substack, I don't know, a month ago, maybe, just like talking about the structures, what has happened in other stadium deals around the world. So part of it will be equity. They will likely sell off part of this stadium co to somebody else, right? Or bringing revenues forward effectively, mortgaging the revenues. Part of it will be stadium naming rights, and you get a big chunk up front. It won't just be an annual deal like Arsenal did, for example. Part of it will be some kind of debt, like whether it's a bond issued on the stadium co or just more standard debt, right? There will be a mortgage effectively on the stadium co, like commercial rights, right? So what happens outside of match days and stuff like that. I mean, it would just like, there are a lot of ways United will go with this. I don't see this as a project, given that other projects around the world have been sold, like privately, SoFi being 4 times more expensive, and they managed to do it with very few actual games there. It doesn't seem to me to be for the birds, to quote somebody, that it's possible to sell this, especially with United in a reasonably healthy place. Now, of course, United's revenues really do matter now with squad costs for all. Revenues really do matter. Yeah. And they do matter for how you think about the viability of the club generally. But can we assume that this stadium would be full 25 days a year, and then there would be a bunch of other events and concerts and conferences, and especially with the design of the stadium kind of very much suggests that they want to use this 365 days a year. Can we assume that? Yeah, absolutely. What's happened to Real Madrid? 200 million euros a year in additional revenue from the redesign. I think Barcelona are looking for something similar, although they've already sold off some of that, of course, with one of their levers. So, that it is financeable, and it's likely profitable within the financing as well, and would be separate, as you said, from the company. All right, let's talk about the Glazer ownership a little bit, because there was that piece in Bloomberg, David Hillier? It is David Hillier.
Yeah. Hillier, I think.
Hillier, yes. One of those. Anyway, whatever the fuck you're called, David, suggested that some of the Glazers are looking at a potential sale. It didn't feel new news, but I guess someone has talked, because they don't talk a lot. What did you read into that article, which basically said some of them are looking for some kind of sale?
Yeah, look, I think that, without wanting to sound glib, that is the new news, right? We had heard that may have been the case at the point at which Sir Jim Ratcliffe trawlers took a stake, now Ineos. I think the fact that you have seen a reiteration of that publicly, and the most public reiteration of that, I think it is interesting. If I think about, how this might play out, look, I think number one, right, there has to be a path to 50.1 for Ineos. And the Glazers selling, some of these siblings selling another tranche of shares could be a way to do that. There is then a question of, would there be an additional, like, again, this is where the stadium financing can get really complex because, you know, if you bring an external investor to the table, there will be a question about whether they invest in the club or do they invest purely in the stadium, right? There are pros and cons to both. For instance, there are some clubs, pretty big clubs, that have had investors purely in their stadium. And then those investors, their return is a slice of that cash flow, revenue, etc. in the in X number of years after the stadium's been built. So, to me, I think I've heard people or had questions around, would an external investor come so that the Glazers did not have 50.1%? I'm like, well, yes, maybe, but would Ineos agree to that? I'm not sure, right? Like, they could still be the biggest shareholder at the table, and if they're working in party with this external investor, fine, but that's not watertight as a corporate structure, and you could in effect become even more hamstrung by the corporate structure in terms of what financing that allows you to do, because if any of you don't agree, you're back at square one. So I think that still to me is the key variable here, is and what this news confirmed is that some of the Glazer siblings may provide an avenue to provide an avenue to do that. And then there is, does it happen before or after Feb 2027?
Yeah.
Up until Feb 2027, the Glazers all have to act together. After that, who knows?
Yeah, well, that agreement between Ineos and the Glazer family, as you said, key marker at Feb 2027 when some of the clauses in the contract expire. The other thing is the Glazers all float as a block. That was in the sales agreement as well. It was kind of noted in there. Do they have a separate agreement between themselves? It's a contract that is ongoing, right? So in effect, does Avram and Joel, who appear to be the people who are most interested, with Edward, Darcy, Brian, and I always forget the other one. There's 6 of them. Edward, Darcy, Brian.
Kevin?
Avram. What's the other one called?
Did you say Kevin?
Kevin. I always forget Kevin. He's so forgettable. So he's left home alone.
I think I might have actually seen him at one of the games once.
Wow. Amazing.
Once,
so it appears that 2 of them want to stay and 4 of them don't. I mean, that has been the general press speculation. Of course, they never say anything, ever, any of them. So they would have agreed between them that there would be a sale, and any sale from 4 of the siblings, whether all of it or part of it, affects effectively the control that Avram and Joel have or not, right? And so the politics of this are quite complicated. Would a third party want to come in? Well, let's look at the motivations of third parties who'd want to come into this kind of corporate structure and want to be on the cap table with a balance of A and B shares, right? So general open market investors, that you can buy shares already on the stock exchange, and they've been doing very well, actually, at the moment. Very kind of interesting. United up about 40% this year. So would they buy more? Well, you can go buy more. You have no corporate power. Would a institutional investor, pension fund or whatever, well, they can buy open market shares. They're not going to be buying the B shares. Would something like a private equity fund want to buy in? Well, that's an interesting one, because although it may be a long hold, you still want a path out, right? If you're a private equity fund, what is the path out if you're a minority shareholder in a 3-way, unbelievable menage a trois of fuckwits, right? So I can't see it, right? So it's like if you're a Silver Lake or just picking up Aries or whatever, what is the motivation for getting your 10x return on this or whatever X you need in order to provide returns to your LPs? It looks very hard. Ultra net worth.
I was going to, sorry, glib comment. With SpaceX, you may not need 10x anymore.
Well, yeah, very true. Yeah. Yeah. Elon, by the way, you said you're a United fan. If you want to use like 0.01% of your wealth to just wipe out all United's debt and build a new stadium and be a passive investor, you can do it tomorrow and you wouldn't even notice, right? It's changed down the back of your sofa, mate.
Yeah.
But But just to get back to the point, like, what are the motivations of these different actors? State wealth, well, that's different, right? If they wanted to pass the buy-in, it's just which states, because two of the biggest ones are tied up in other clubs. Newcastle being an interesting question about where they go with that one. So, in fact, three of the biggest ones: UAE with City, Qatar with Paris Saint-Germain, Saudi Arabia. So, what other states are there? So, it just tells me that it's kind of difficult with this kind of structure to work out the motivations, unless it is basically an ultra high net worth private party who may have a fund of some kind or a vehicle, but is basically their family money.
Yeah, and I think that's where, to me, if there was institutional money, which is the asset managers, the private equity, etc., if they were to get involved, that's where, to me, I would steer more towards it would be specifically for the stadium, because there is a clear line of sight on a return for that for that investment, and it's becoming an increasingly well-trodden path, which also makes it a lot easier for when you're going through investment. Go into an investment committee and trying to get sign off on such a deal. It's a lot easier to do when you've got some comparables. Yeah,
absolutely. It's much cleaner. The Stadium Co, the ownership around the Stadium Co, or the financing of the Stadium Co, and the revenues that will come for it, there are lots of comparables. And at elite level, Barcelona, Real Madrid, done very, very well. So have Spurs, not elite level. The Milan Stadium project will be interesting. They're going to destroy the San Siro, which is like a war crime, basically. Shouldn't be allowed, but it appears to be that's exactly what they're going to do. But that will give us another idea. That's going to be a smaller size, 60,000 or something like that, I think. But in other sports, there's lots of projects. SoFi being a very obvious one. But in the States, I mean, if you look at the World Cup now, I think Arrowhead is the second oldest stadium in the whole tournament. That's the one at Kansas City. Is it still called Arrowhead? It's sponsored
I have
by
no
someone.
idea.
Yeah, whatever. And that's like 25 years old. The other one is the Azteca, which is 75 years old or something. The rest of them are basically new. And of course, in the US, you often get local people paying for it through their tax bill, effectively or partially paying for it through the tax bill. Happened here in Seattle. So when you're looking at the mountains and the water and the downtown landscape, when the game's there, we're all paying for that on our tax bill. It's very open, actually. The one thing I do like about the US, you can interrogate absolutely every part of the local budget because it's completely open. So, I just as an example, you get a lot of people moaning about the wokeness of the budget, of course, right? But you can just go look at the budget. Oh, $29 million for equity programs in an $8.9 million budget for the city. I don't know whether that counts as a woke budget or not. It's almost all ring fence, but part of it is the stadium. And you can go, look, that won't happen with United, of course. I mean, it's been really clear the political pushback would be too great. I can't imagine Manchester City Council putting too much in. There will be some from central government. They've already put an infrastructure fund in place. So I think they've earmarked about 200 million for local infrastructure, transport, roads, whatever. So
and Manchester, I think I did a piece last year on this. I think Manchester, along with the West Midlands, have got first dibs on that.
Right.
And so that will be, we've heard them talk about how good transport infrastructure is vital for the new stadium. That, the new trade station that they want to build is going to be a key component of this, and potentially making sure there's some more carriages on the trams for when people want to go to a game.
Yeah, and they can take a leaf out of the World Cup ticket pricing and charge £98 to get from Manchester City Centre to Salford. Yeah, no problem.
But maybe also have some people, like more people checking that they have actually tapped in.
Yeah.
All right. Common bugbear.
Amazon. United have signed a deal with Amazon to do an all or nothing. There's been an interesting reaction from United fans about this one. Part of it is like, yes, we'd love to see inside. I mean, it'll be certainly sanitized in some fashion. It'd be interesting to see what's in that contract, whether it is really all or nothing will be seen of the mess. A lot of people worried about, given the corporate management history over the last decade or so, that this could be rather embarrassing. Where do you sit on that fence?
Look, I have a I just have a long-standing belief that there are some things that, like, it should be a privilege to see that sort of stuff, and opening your doors up, it's just something that I personally don't like, but I can totally see the rationale for it, right? Like, if you look at Arsenal as just as an example, they did it in the 21-22 season, just as they were kind of really getting the wheels turning on their rebuild and their turnaround process, and giving a lot of license to Mikel Arteta. It kind of showed the turnaround that was on the way, and I'm fairly sure that their marketing departments would have seen some pretty interesting numbers that they can then go to sponsors with and talk to them about it, and how far the reach is, and the demographics of those individuals who are watching it and could potentially be Arsenal fans. I would not be surprised if that's also what's going on here. It gives, I think, the club a much more updated benchmark as to exactly where we sit in terms of our fandom and the reach that we have. Arsenal's sponsorship revenue has increased 80% since that point in time. This year, when they report their latest set of numbers, it's going to have more than doubled.
Yeah.
And I think this will be one of the steps on the journey in order to do that. And look, if this is the price that you have to now pay, then look, maybe we have to do it. I think my biggest thing from kind of like trying to get more people engaged with Manchester United and make them become fans is make sure that all those new people that you're bringing along the way truly understand the history and the heritage. And actually, like, if I'm putting my blue sky thinking cap on and being like, okay, what might be the plan here? Well, we already know that there's the drama series that's potentially going to be in the works.
Yeah.
So if you've got this kind of newer form of content with the also new form of content, but explaining some of the history and the backstory of United, and also our friend Wayne Barton doing the stuff on 1878. I'm kind of like, well, actually, you're doing new form media and content and bringing it to people where they are to explain what the club is all about. Actually, in the rounds, I'm kind of like, I can actually get on board with that strategy. Obviously, there is a risk that if things go wrong, what are we actually going to see? And are they going to, are they going to do a Spurs when they sacked Pochettino?
Yeah.
And just almost not reference it? Maybe, but like, there's also a part of me which is like, well, again, what do we expect?
This club, at least under the Glazers, have been quite sensitive to PR. I mean, they didn't make big structural changes, but they did freak out a little bit about stuff. I mean, there have been 2 times when the Glazer family have given interviews when they bought the club and when fans broke into the stadium and got a game called off. And they promised lots and lots of changes and fans on a fan board and all of that kind of stuff. And it was all basically lip service. But they will be sensitive to what's in this. And I'm sure they're mindful that there could be embarrassment along the way. Everyone is hoping that Michael Carrick continues his journey of success. And the stories in there are mostly positive and not ones of utter chaos within the club and more sackings and all of that kind of stuff. But there will be an editorial process that they've agreed to with this. I mean, this is Amazon, right, who paid $40 million for a Melania documentary, which was basically a 2-hour-long advert for Melania talking like a robot.
Look, there will be an editorial line. And I think, I hope the club don't just portray everything as things are all working, things are all positive. Again, I'll refer back to the ones that I've seen. I didn't watch the City one for pretty obvious reasons. But I did watch the Arsenal and Spurs all or nothing documentaries. And there were some bits, and pieces in there where they were kind of showing you glimpses of like some of the uncomfortable truths. Right, the conversations with Dele Alli and Danny Rose with Mourinho. There was the moment where Aubameyang got stripped of the captaincy. You didn't see necessarily warts and all, but you kind of saw parts of how that was dealt with. And look, there will be legal reasons why you can't necessarily show all of that, all of the stuff. So I think, as long as we, hope, as you say, hopefully there is nothing that goes wrong and this is just the perfect season and 21 is coming and exactly, that would make it the ultimate all or nothing documentary. But if there are things that do go wrong, or there are pressure point moments, I hope we do get to see a glimpse of it. I think just making it a complete positive spin, I'm not sure how well that would actually be received.
Yeah, well, we're all going to enjoy Sir Jim ranting about immigrants and suggesting that the women's team wear bikinis or something like that. So, yeah, joy. All right, is that it? Have we finished our agenda? Do we have anything else we were talking about?
No, I mean, unless you want to talk about transfers.
Oh. Nothing has happened. Happened. Edison on a 30, well, it depends, euros, right? It was 35 plus 5.
Yeah.
It's over a 4+1 contract. Interesting. Like, rather than 5+1 as they've tended to do. It's pretty cheap. Basically, it's one of those ones that, like the player, don't like the player. It's hard to fail on this kind of deal. A bit like Josh Zirkzee, they should effectively get his book value back this summer. Mateus Fernandes, we expect that to be done. West Ham want 80. You want to pay 40. What's the number in the middle, folks? Will you get there?
Yeah, sorry, actually, on that deal, there is also an interesting point linked back to the refinancing, which is, this access to cash and how much do they pay down on the credit facility, right? We know that West Ham need cash, right? They're going, so, there was a comment in the going concern part of their audit report this year. And the owners had agreed that, they would put up any funds that they want. There's obviously ownership changes going on there, and that will impact the likely or the amount of cash that at least Daniel Kretinsky will be putting in. And so it's kind of also, how can we play around with things, because our cost of debt is going to be way cheaper than West Ham's that have now been relegated. Mm-hmm. And so I think we've talked about this on a prior podcast, but that idea that if you can negotiate maybe a slightly lower price for more up front, because actually if you paid the bigger fee and you did a transfer financing agreement on that, the actual cash that West Ham would end up with would be less than the lower fee that you're paying anyway. So I think that's actually kind of that will be an interesting question that may be floating around the idea, the heads of the executive at the moment. But, there is risk with that. The more cash you're paying up front, the more that you kind of need the transfer to work immediately.
Yeah. Yep, fair enough. I think we'll see some activity after the World Cup's finished. There's a lot of focus on that. I mean, Mateus Fernandes is not at the World Cup. We are recording on June 17th. Portugal will be playing there. We'll be seeing Super Bruno Fernandes playing. No one has executed on that deal that allows him to go away for 65 million euros. No, thank you. We did find out this week, or at least I found out this week, that Marcus Rashford has a 40 million exit clause as well, just not to Liverpool or Manchester City if it's a domestic transfer, right? So Barcelona didn't execute on their option, which was on June the 15th. They may still do. They may, as many people suspect, be angling for another loan. Or maybe not. Maybe they're happy with Gordon as their option, but they certainly need forwards. But that clause, I didn't know about that. Did you? Is that new?
No, it's new, but there had been talk about, if Barcelona didn't execute the option, that the price was probably going to be set at 40 million for anyone else. So I think this is probably, the root of some of those stories. I think it's a pretty good price. It's about the same as Garnacho, different ends of their career, but also different levels of performance. It's just whether, it just comes down to whether Rashford will be willing to take a haircut on his wages.
Yeah.
We're seeing this week, actually, that is another thing. Amorim, and a potential savings of him going to AC Milan, which I have some doubts about as to, the reality of that. But there will potentially be another, conversation like there was with Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Anthony as to, well, if a move does happen, who's going to be paying? Yeah, what's the payoff going to be?
Yeah. Just briefly on Amorim, because the contentious bit here is because United put it in their last financials at 16.7 million or whatever it was. Was that a contingency? It's an exceptional cost. Did they actually pay that out in cash, or with most managers, often what happens? Let's not say most, but often what happens is you just keep paying them for the rest of their contract until they get another piece of employment, and so. At that point, which is where all the stories came from, United saved the money because he's now been re-employed. You don't have to keep paying him. That is unclear, right? Whether United actually paid it out in full up front or whether they're paying him and that was just in the accounts as we expect this to come.
So let me nerd out a little bit here.
Yeah.
So in the accounts, what you would have to do, is go back to 2Q. United said that they were going to put a provision in for £15.9 million, which they thought was the maximum payout that was going to occur to Amorim and his coaches.
Yeah.
The last set of results, it was reported as an exceptional cost of £16.7 million.
Right.
Right. So what that means is, for all intents and purposes, what United will be obligated to pay. It might differ from the payment terms, but it'll be an accounting choice as to whether they decide to do that. My prevailing assumption was that is going to be all paid out to Amorim and his staff at point of exit, because the reality is it's just the cleanest way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So where could that be wrong is this exact point in terms of the payment terms. So if the payment terms are staggered in any way, shape or form, what will likely be the case is that if there is a difference in wages, United will just have to top Amorim up to keep him whole. It feels unlikely that 10 million saving that people are talking about will actually transpire. It would be a great bit of deal making, but it would be a weird way to account for something and potentially do a deal. So look, I'm skeptical. I think if there is a saving, it would be lower than 10 million. The reality is it's a one-off saving. Is it going to dramatically transform our finances? No. I've heard some people saying that, this is equivalent to someone on 175 grand a week that we can now and spend. Well, no, that's just for 1 year. So divide it by 4 or divide it by 5, much different player profile.
By the way, if Amorim has picked up £16 million from United and then got another job, some good deal making he's done. Interesting, in Milan, they do not have a sporting director. It appears to be the owners that have made this decision. Which is that still Redbird Capital that own Milan?
Yeah. So basically, they didn't make the Champions League. Redbird took, the knife to basically the whole of the sporting structure, and I think some of them had actually only been in place for a year. So it was a pretty ruthless move to make. And as you said, Jerry Cardinal has now come in, appointed Amorim. That may be exactly what he wants in terms of a traditional manager style model. Will it work? Might be tricky.
Yeah. We're all burned a little bit by what happened, but I'm looking at Milan's squad and looking at their structure and lack of sporting structure. By the way, little note to end on. Amorim, who said, "I've come to be the manager, not the head coach," in the press release. What was his job title? Head coach.
Yeah, I think I said this at the time. My read of that situation is, and this is purely speculation, but if you think back to the timing of this, we needed someone and we needed someone quickly. We know at that point Ineos were pretty hands-on because, the changes were all going on. I wonder whether there were some lines crossed in terms of, look, we kind of want you to be a manager type, person that has a lot of say, but you won't have that immediately. And then Jason Wilcox gets promoted, the structure evolves because of the Dan Ashworth departure, etc. That then changes the situation. And, if Ruben Amorim wants ultimate control, then look, it makes complete sense for him to move on, and he might now get that at AC Milan. He's still, I'll to retain, he still did a lot of good things. How the squad evolved, that needed to happen.
All right, Rafael Leao, enjoy playing at left wing back. It's going to be top for your career. Dearie me. I think that's it. Hopefully everyone nerded out on debt financing, stadium financing, Amorim's payoff, and whether the Glazers are going to sell out or not. Fun and games. Jamie, enjoy. You're off on your hollybobs next week. Watching the World Cup in the sight of the pyramids. Be great stuff.
An England game tonight.
Come on, England, I guess. Yeah.
Come on, Colby Mainoo. Come on, Colby Mainoo.
Come on, Colby. Yeah, well done. Thanks a lot, everyone. You can catch us on YouTube if you're listening to this. If you're watching it, well, thank you. Hit subscribe, because someone's got to tell the algo to show it to people, which at the moment it is not.
Haven't they got to smash it? They've got to
smash it.
And they've got to smash the like button.
Hang out the back of the like button. Very good. You can catch us on Patreon. I haven't done an extra for a little bit because, we did a deep dive on Edison. If you didn't catch that, you can find that on our Patreon with Darnish talking about his strengths and weaknesses and tactical profile. You can catch, why am I doing this, Jamie? I don't know. I'm doing like daily roundups because I'm in the right time zone and not everyone else is. Doing daily roundups of the World Cup with a red tinted lens. And that is also on the Substack and the YouTube, but not in your podcast feed. So go catch that if you haven't. And we'll catch you on the next United Finance Pod shortly.